Until you complete the relationship with your parents, all your relationships will be about your parents. Completion, as we will define it, is not about continuing or ending a relationship. It's about being completely at peace and accepting for the way it was and the way it is. Complete peace and acceptance, which means no more resentment, which means no more guilt, no more shame, no more judgment, no more righteousness, no more blame, wrong making, victimization. None of it. Total and complete acceptance and peace for the way it was and the way it is. That's what we'll define as completion. And so when we're looking at completion through the context of the relationship with our parents, why? Why would we start with our parents versus a significant other, our boss, our roommates, this, our brothers or sisters? Because we'll assert that your parents are the foundational, formational relationship from which you relate to all other human beings, whether you're conscious of it or not. They were your early caretakers. They were your source of survival. And you might say, Jeremiah, but I grew up with my grandparents and my parents abandoned me and I was adopted at age 3, or my dad was never around, or whatever. Doesn't matter. You still came from your biological parents. And I've worked with elite special operation military vets. I worked with a guy once who had been in 10 combat deployments, which is unfathomable in a 20-year period. I was in the Marines. Like, that's just even me just comprehending. Like, he was one of 40 people who fought, one of 40 Americans, only 40 total Americans. It was in the Syrian, like, depth of like hell and battle. There's only 200 of this guy's um, status in the military in the whole United States of over 2 million military members, to give you like how elite, like the most elite troop we have in the world. And this guy had seen combat and levels of horror that people just could not imagine. He took innocent lives that he's got to live with now, that he's worked through. He's watched people just die in front of him. And when I opened up this level of dialogue with him, and then we started to get into the nice nitty gritty work underneath it through our exercises and our process stuff that we take people in our paid program through, that work brought him to his knees, resisted it, fought it, and his father had left when he was 3 months old. Father wasn't even around yet. And it was like, oh, well, it doesn't matter because my father wasn't around. It was this, and he was able to see over time that most of his life was a derivative, was a reaction to the relationship that he didn't have with his father and all of the unresolved emotions that transpired over time. He saw that he could make it to the top of his game, the most elite force we have in the world, the most just stacked with accolades and things that he'd accomplished. And he really got that wasn't it. That wasn't it. That's not going to solve the things that I didn't want to deal with or haven't had the capacity to deal with mom and dad. And I can share you hundreds of these, and I can help you correlate how most people's lives are shaped, molded, dominated by, they're surviving, influenced by what's incomplete with their parents. And so that's a starting point. And you say, okay, now, what I haven't done as much in the past, which I was like, today, I know I need to do this today. Yet, why would we focus on parents of all the things that we could do and we could look at to get more freed up? Well, we assert, we align with Adlerian psychology, who was a third heavyweight next to Freud and Jung, that all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. That you could boil down every problem you have in your life and you can trace it back to some sort of relationship. And if you look at the nature of trauma, most trauma is relational trauma. Yeah, there's car wrecks, there's impact, there's these things, but a majority stems from relational. And if we look inside of the world of relationships, where is the energy that the problem stem from? It's often in two areas: resentment and grief. And so today is more along the lines of the world of resentment. Grief's welcome too. And so what we assert is that when you take it down to the core foundational formational relationship of where things are incomplete, that it creates this ripple effect in all of your relationships, because you will see how undeniable it is that who you've been being in all of your relationships and the problems you've created in your life and the things you're holding on to and you haven't let go will always trace back to mom and dad, whether you're conscious of it or not. And when I saw the truth of this, I literally just got on this like 9 years ago. I went to Landmark and I heard this quote from the founder of Landmark, Werner Erhard, who said, "Until you complete the relationship with your parents, all your relationships will be about your parents." And that was such a fucking mind fuck for me to hear that. I saw the truth of it. And for the next 7 years after that, it was my spiritual guidepost. I could see the disconnection and the rage and the timidity and the not timidity, the rage, the anger, the resentment, the fearfulness, the wanting to dominate and be revengeful of people. Like I could see all of it in romantic partnerships, business partnerships. I started to see how it was all traced back how I felt towards my parents and my family. And it opened up many things for me, which I'll come into later. So why? Because we assert that if you get it cleared with your parents, you'll then naturally start to go want to clear it and resolve it in all relationships. You'll see the impact that it's caused. And then when that's all resolved, or we'll say complete, then your life flourishes as a function of that. Why? Well, you could also we'll assert that life is made up of the relationships in our life. Everything that we create, not everything, but mostly what we create is created through people, created through language, created through conversations, created through relationships. Your life is a series of conversations. So if those conversations are a byproduct of repressed shame, guilt, resentment, it's all energy. It's still getting put out here. And so once that's complete, you could then assert that your life is remarkable because you're no longer creating from a place of pain, or Judah say with the traumatic imprint. You're not creating life as a reaction to what's wrong and what's incomplete. You're creating life from a place of peace and completion. And so what you bring forth is more peace. You bear healthy fruit. Yet what most people are doing, they're trying to jump in the next relationship and build the next business and do the next thing and the next and the next and the next. And they're bringing all of that shit into the present and they're creating their future from it. And so we take it down to the bone. To finish our program, you have to, and to be able to follow on, you have to be in right relationship with every single person in your life. That's our standard. Right relationship, and AKA completion. And so that's the context of why, because we saw through time and time again, I've seen it years and years and years. I've seen it in so many different patterns. Some of you might even have heard of people like Garen, our mutual mentor, talk about, he went and made amends with 200 people. He went and said sorry to 200. Preston's talked about it in his ways. And what I always saw missing is that I never heard people really talk about the deep inner process to get to that stage. Because it's not just like, oh, I'm going to go say sorry. But like, what is the deep seeing of who I've been and the character defects and how they rippled? What have I been making all of that stuff mean about them, about me, about the world? How did I feel about it then? How did I feel about it today? What's the somatic component in my body? Where am I responsible? What are the ways I'm grateful for them? These are just some of the things we take people all the way through. And then I go out and I create conversations to own who I've been being so that that pattern dies, that I create a funeral for those parts of me that have kept me in dysfunction. And so that's why we're having this conversation, to open it up, to illuminate the source of our relationships. And to put it on a spectrum, because some of you have had horrific things happen. You've potentially been raped by a parent. You've been maybe sexually molested by a relative. And then your parent wasn't there to hear you, or they denied your experience. I've worked with some people in the current round whose father murdered their mother. Parents left at a young age. It's nothing I haven't seen so far. Yet what I have seen is no matter what's happened, I've watched people be able to let it all go and have loving compassion and complete forgiveness. I've seen people finally move to a stage where they move to another stage of consciousness where they realize it wasn't even anything to forgive. If you actually assert and you say, well, it's all working out perfectly and the divine order is always happening. And I'm not talking about bypassing and going straight to it. I'm talking about the deep steps to really embody it and feel it, like, oh, okay, I see it. I went through it all. Yeah. Why would I say there's anything to forgive? That means it has to be wrong, because if it was wrong and it shouldn't have happened, then I wouldn't have the wisdom and the gifts right now. There wasn't anything even to forgive. I'm just future pacing you a little bit. So on one end of the spectrum, I grew up lots of physical abuse. I was medicated from age 6, put on prescription pills for 10 years. Father went to prison. Stepfather abused me, hated the put in church, punished, isolated in schools, grounded for 6 months on end at times at home. No natural light, no social contact. I hated. I had homicidal rage, hate towards my parents and my family. Always thought something was wrong with me. Like literally on 5, 10 different medications for a decade. Just didn't know who I was. Always wrong. A living obsessive compulsive disorder. Hours, 3 to 6 hours a day, just doing rituals. What's wrong with me? How do I get out of this? Hating my parents. Literally the day after I graduated high school, I went to college out of state. At 18, I actually ran away from home. My father came up, ran up the stairs. Some of you maybe have seen my life story on Instagram. I said we got in a big fight to protect also his, but he came upstairs and choked me out, punched me. And I left. I said, fuck this. I'm out of here. And I go over to my father's house that I wanted to live with all my life, but he just didn't have the capacity. My mom had custody. He's in and out of prison. I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings as a 6-year-old for 10. I go over to see my father every other weekend. 90% of the time, I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings with him. That's what my father needed to be sober, or then he's sleeping because he's working the night shift. I was just working a session out with Judith now about deep rage and anger today that I finally could see was trapped under all the grief, and I had to work through around now being there in his death. And I look at all of these things that I had. There was a world where I never thought it would be possible, from what I had experienced and felt and went through, to how would I have love and intimacy? And today I do. I have love, intimacy, and closeness, even with my father who died in 2010, and with my mother and stepfather who are alive now. And so all I'm sharing right here is there's a spectrum. I don't care where you're at on the spectrum. What I can tell you is it's absolutely possible to have love and closeness and intimacy. Notice how I didn't say that you have to be in their physical presence. I didn't say about continuing or ending. I said completion. And when things are complete, you'll naturally start to experience your heart and mind expanded in possibilities for what that relationship can be. And so the intention is a creation of space, of a space in which you can be in life. And completing the relationships in your life is handling, let me say it again, completing the relationship with your parents is handling the source of your relationships. And once you complete the relationship with your parents, you can finally work on what's going on in other relationships. You can finally begin to relate to others. For the first time, you're actually working on what's going on in that relationship rather than acting out and dramatizing What's incomplete in the relationship with your parents? If your stove breaks and you go try to work on the faucet thinking the stove's that's going to fix the stove, it's not very effective. It doesn't work well. I'll say it again. If the stove breaks and you go over try to work on the sink thinking it's going to fix the stove, it's not very effective. Yet that's what a lot of people are doing. It's the next person will save me in this, and I'll work all my mommy and daddy stuff out with them, and I'll get it. And no matter what they do, no matter how safe they are, as John Wineland would say, I like to say, you'll make that person unsafe. No matter how much, it's just a bottomless pit. I'll never get what mom and dad didn't give me, or what the divine, what I've not let the divine give me. I always bring it up a notch. And so again, the assertion is that once you complete the relationship with your parents to the best you can see, you can finally work on what's going on in the other relationships. And when I say the best you can see, well, there's some things that are unconscious. We can do so much to elicit and see what's there, and the conscious and take care of it and deal with it. And then some things in our environment are going to expose things. I knew that this rage and anger that I've been looking at these past few weeks, it was coming to the surface. And I did my session with Judith today. I had this wild dream last night. My father was like experiences that brought up my father. I woke up this morning and remembering those experiences where I'd go over there and I just wanting him to wake up to play with me and my brother and feeling so alone. And Judah takes me in my body and I'm sitting there in this and she she even asked, "Are we gonna do the session today?" And I got back to her like 5 minutes after, still before her time, and she was late to the session. And I got fucking angry and rageful. I've never been angry and rageful at Judith in 3 years. And I knew it wasn't about her. And I told her, I'm like, I was so fucking angry you didn't show up on time. And she goes, "This is a divine setup." And I go, "I know." And so then I just felt it. And it was, why weren't you fucking there for me? Why weren't you fucking there for me? And how does that show up? To projecting everybody else when I don't get what I want. I'm gonna be angry with you. I'm gonna fight you. I'm gonna project. You'll never meet my standards. You'll never fulfill what my dad could have fulfilled. All subconscious. That's why I say you'll do the best of your ability. And we got to recognize that there's things that you don't know that you don't know. There's things that you know that you don't know that are running the show. This is a conversation about how much are we willing to own? How much are we willing to be with and see right now? And so consider that an entire function as a human being is related to your fears, phobias, upsets of your father or mother. And who you are is somehow being dominated by, shaped by, molded by, limited by, closed in by the relationship you have with them. I'll say it again. Consider that the entire function as a human being is related to your fears, phobias, upsets, you could say breakdowns, grievances, resentments of your father or mother, and who you are is somehow being dominated by, shaped by, molded by, limited by, closed in by that relationship with them. And when you give up your attachment to being feared or to fear or being dominated by, or give up your attachment to voiding and seeing your parents in a certain way, then there's a space for them to actually be and occur differently to you. You know how many times this is my favorite work. This is my favorite dialogue. This is because I was just to watch what happens for not just the relationship with their parents, to me is the most prized thing in my life, but what happens in every single relationship in your life when people are willing to let it all go. I say it again, when you give up your attachment to being fearful, being dominated by, avoiding, and seeing your parents in any certain way, then there's a space for them to be and occur differently to you.